There are women who have spent their entire lives being the person who shows up, the person who stays, the person who gives quietly, without announcement, without applause, without any expectation that the giving will ever be acknowledged or returned. Women who have packed lunches and worked double shifts and swallowed their own exhaustion so that the people around them could keep going. Women who have loved people fully and completely and found out, sometimes slowly and sometimes all at once, that the love they were receiving in return had conditions attached to it that nobody ever bothered to mention out loud. If you're one of those women, and if you're watching this, there's a very good chance that you are, then this story is going to reach you somewhere deep. Because this is not just a story about a man who lost $1 billion. This is a story about what loyalty actually looks like when everything that makes it easy has been stripped away. This is a story about a young woman named Diane Carter, who had $14 in her checking account, a sick 4-year-old daughter, and a break room she almost did not walk back out of. And it is a story about what she built from that moment, and what it meant when the only person who had ever seen her clearly needed her most. For Marcus Hale, the worst night of his life came on a Tuesday in October, in a penthouse apartment on the west side of Manhattan, with nothing but the sound of rain against floor-to-ceiling windows and a phone lighting up on an empty marble countertop. He almost did not answer it, and if he had let it ring, if he had done what every exhausted, broken part of him wanted to do and simply turn away from that glowing screen, this story would have ended right there. But Marcus answered, and the voice on the other end of that phone was a woman he had met once, briefly, 5 years earlier. A woman he had helped without thinking about it. A woman who had never forgotten. Stay with me, because the end of this story is going to remind you of something you already know, but may have stopped believing. Before we go any further, we want to know where you are watching from. Drop your city and state in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We tell the stories that the news does not have time for, and we tell them the way they deserve to be told. Now let us start where this story really begins. Not in the penthouse, not with the $1 billion, but in a break room in South St. Louis on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, with a 24-year-old woman sitting alone with $14 to her name and a decision to make about whether any of it was worth continuing. Because that is where the real story lives. That is the moment everything else grew from. And to understand why that moment mattered so much, you first need to understand who Diane Carter was and what her life actually looked like before anyone thought to pay attention to it. Before this story goes any further, there are 3 things I need you to hold in your mind. 3 questions that do not have easy answers. 3 questions that, by the time we reach the end of this video, will have been answered completely, and not one of those answers will land the way you are expecting right now. The first question is this: how does a man spend 4 years building a life with a woman? 4 years of shared mornings and vacations and private conversations and the kind of closeness that makes 2 people feel like a single functioning unit, and then discover the moment that billion-dollar life loses its financial foundation, that he had been the only one who believed it was real? How does that happen? And more importantly, what does it say about the nature of loyalty when money and love are allowed to occupy the same sentence? The second question is this: who is Diane Carter? She is a woman Marcus met once, for less than 4 minutes, 5 years before that phone rang. She was 24 years old at the time, working a retail job, raising a child alone, holding on by the thinnest possible thread. He did one thing for her, one small unplanned thing, and then he walked out of that store and drove away and did not think about it again. So who did Diane Carter become in the 5 years between that moment and the night she called him? And why, of all the people in Marcus Hale's world, was she the one who picked up the phone? The third question is the one that will stay with you longest. It is the question that this entire story is really about. The question is this: what is a person actually worth? Not in dollars, not in portfolio value, not in the size of the apartment or the reach of the network. What is a person worth when the accounts are empty and the companies are gone and the apartment lease is up in 30 days? What remains? We are about to find out. Diane Carter grew up in a working-class neighborhood in South St. Louis, the second of three children raised by a woman named Gloria, who worked double shifts at a diner and who loved her children with the specific fierce love of a mother who knows that love alone is not enough but gives it anyway, because it is the one thing nobody can take from you. Gloria was the kind of woman that women in that age range will recognize immediately. The kind of woman who ironed her uniform at 5 in the morning before anyone else was awake. The kind of woman who never complained where her children could hear it. The kind of woman who had given so much of herself to other people for so long that she had made a science of knowing exactly how little she needed to keep going. Diane had absorbed everything about her mother. The work ethic, the dignity, the refusal to be made small by circumstances that had not been her choice. What she had also absorbed, watching Gloria, was a bone-deep understanding of how much women give and how quietly the world accepts that giving without ever quite feeling the weight of what it costs. Diane had not planned to be a single mother at 19. She had planned college. She had planned a career in business. She had always had a mind that naturally saw systems, that understood instinctively how things connected and why certain things worked and others did not. She had completed 1 year at St. Louis Community College when she fell in love with a young man named Kevin who was charming and funny and entirely unable to be the person he promised to be when it mattered. When Diane found out she was pregnant, Kevin said all the right things. He did not do any of them. By the time their daughter Amara was 8 months old, Kevin had gone the way of men who make promises they never intended to keep, gradually by degrees, until one day the absence was simply the new normal and Diane was standing in it alone, holding a baby, recalculating everything. She moved back in with Gloria for a year. Then she rented a small 2-bedroom apartment in the Bevo Mill neighborhood and went back to work. She took the job at the department store because it was available, it paid $11 an hour, and it offered health insurance that covered Amara's pediatric visits. She was also working weekends, hostessing at a restaurant nearby. She was sending $20 a week to a savings account she had opened to eventually pay for an online business certification course that cost $480. She had been saving for 7 months. She had $206 in the account. She was 24 years old. She was doing everything right by every measure available to her. And she was exhausted in the way that women who are doing everything right with nothing to spare are exhausted. Not defeated, not broken, but running on a kind of fuel that has no name except the refusal to stop. The day Marcus Hale walked into that department store, Diane had been awake since 4 in the morning because Amara had woken up with a fever. She had given her children's Tylenol, called her mother to come stay with her, and arrived at work on less than 3 hours of sleep. By mid-morning, she had made a pricing error on a customer transaction, an honest mistake, the kind that happens to any person running on exhaustion, and her shift supervisor, Gary, had made a point of correcting her in front of 2 other employees with the specific energy of a small man who has been waiting for exactly this kind of moment. The discrepancy, by the time Gary finished calculating, came to $287. $287 that would be deducted from her paycheck. Diane stood at that register and did the math in 4 seconds. $14 in checking. Electricity due in 2 days. $206 in savings. 7 months of $20 deposits. Gone in one stroke. And the course she had been working toward for almost a year back at zero. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry and too proud to do it in front of Gary. She nodded. She said she understood. And she went back to the floor with the particular composure of a woman who has learned that falling apart is a luxury she cannot afford right now. Women who are watching this know exactly what that composure feels like. It is not strength in the way people celebrate strength. It is something quieter and harder than that. It is the decision to keep your face still and your feet moving when everything inside you is screaming that this is too much. Diane went to the break room before her next shift started. She sat alone for 7 minutes. She did the math again because doing the math again is what you do when you cannot afford to stop doing the math. And then for the first and only time in her adult life, she let herself think about what it would feel like to simply stop. Not to harm herself. She was careful to say that later, very careful. But to put down the weight. To stop being the woman who keeps going, just for a moment, just to know what it would feel like to not be her. She sat with that thought for 7 minutes. And then a coworker named Tanya appeared at the break room door, on her way to the floor, looked at Diane, and said in a tone that was matter-of-fact and not particularly gentle, but was exactly what the moment needed. "Honey, Gary is a small man with a clipboard. Do not let him make you small." And she was gone. And Diane Carter stood up, and she went back to the floor. And then a billionaire from St. Louis walked into the store. Marcus was born in North St. Louis, Missouri, to a mother named Patricia who worked the overnight shift at a hospital laundry facility, and a grandmother named Ruth who raised him through the school hours and the summers in between. He was not remarkable on paper, not the student teachers wrote letters about, not the kid the guidance counselor pointed to. What he was stubborn and observant and unable to walk past something that needed doing without doing it. He ran track because he decided he wanted to be fast and trained until he was. He took a job at 15 bagging groceries and talked his way into a supervisor position within a year because he showed up 30 minutes early every single day. He worked his way through state college in 3.5 years with a degree in supply chain management and about $800 to his name. He started in logistics at 22. By 28, he had launched Hale Freight Solutions out of a 2-room office in St. Louis with a used desk, a secondhand printer, and 4 clients. By his mid-30s, the company was clearing $40 million a year. He had opened satellite operations in Atlanta, Dallas, and Chicago. He had a team of over 200 people, and he knew something real about most of them. Not because it was strategy, but because Marcus Hale had never stopped being the kid from North St. Louis who thought people deserved to be seen. He was the man who remembered the forklift operator's daughter's name. He was a man who stayed late to help a junior employee rework a proposal. By 37, his freight company, a commercial real estate portfolio of warehousing facilities across the Midwest, and a supply chain technology platform he had co-founded had pushed his total net worth past $1 billion. And then, at 36, Marcus met Victoria Weston. And what happened with Victoria is the part of this story that women aged 45 to 64 will understand in their bones before the narrator finishes the sentence. He walked into a department store on ordinary Tuesday afternoon to buy a birthday gift for his cousin's daughter, heard a number, $287, heard the tone of voice behind it, and did not walk away. He went to the register. He paid the $287 in cash with no announcement and no theater. He walked over to where Diane was straightening a rack of children's sweaters. He said, "Mistakes happen. Do not let this slow you down." He handed her a business card, Marcus Hale, Hale Freight Solutions, and walked away. The entire thing took less than 4 minutes. He thought about it once on the drive back to his cousin's house, and then he set it down and forgot it almost entirely. He did not think about it again for 5 years. Diane Carter thought about it every single day. She went home that night, put Amara to bed, sat at the kitchen table, held the business card in both hands, and cried for 20 minutes. Not out of sadness, out of release. Out of the specific relief that comes when you have been holding something very heavy for a very long time and somebody, without even knowing what they're doing, briefly takes a corner of it. She put the card in the ceramic dish on her kitchen counter next to Amara's vaccination records and her lease agreement. She went to bed. She got up at 5 the next morning. She kept going, but something had shifted. She told Gloria about it that weekend. Gloria listened to the whole story and then said the thing that Diane would repeat for the rest of her life. Gloria said, "Baby, when somebody shows you that good exists, the only right thing to do is go build some more of it." Diane Carter decided that night that that was exactly what she was going to do. And what she did next is the part of this story that every woman watching needs to hear. Because this is not a story about a woman who was rescued by a man's kindness. This is a story about a woman who used one moment of witnessed goodness as the evidence she needed to keep building the life she had always been capable of building. She enrolled in the online business certification course and finished it in 6 weeks, after Amara was asleep at the same kitchen table where she had cried over the business card. She read every business book she could get from the library branch 3 blocks away, with a legal pad for notes that she carried in her uniform pocket at work. Within a year, Diane had been promoted to assistant floor manager. Within 18 months, she was running the entire women's and accessories floor. She enrolled in community college courses in the evenings, business communications, and introduction to supply chain management. That second course was a revelation. She felt something click into place that felt like coming home to a language she had always spoken. At 26, she left the department store and took a junior sales role at a logistics startup called Midwest Supply Chain Partners for $38,000 a year. Her mother thought she was crazy. Diane sat with the fear for 3 days and took the job anyway. She closed her first major account in month 4. She was the highest performing account manager at Midwest Supply Chain Partners by year 2. She kept going to school in the evenings. She coached Amara's soccer team on Saturday mornings. She found an hour most nights to read or study or think about the next step. At 28, she met a woman named Sandra Okafor at a logistics networking event in St. Louis. Sandra was 35, Nigerian-American, a former freight operations manager. They talked for 45 minutes, had lunch the following week, and discovered their skills were almost perfectly complementary. Sandra understood operations and process. Diane understood sales and client relationships. By the time Diane Carter was 29 years old, she and Sandra Okafor had co-founded Carter Okafor Logistics Consulting. Year 1, $340,000 in revenue. Year 2, $800,000. By the time Diane picked up the phone to call a number she had kept in her contacts for 5 years, Carter Okafor was projecting $2.1 million for the current year, had a team of 7, and had just been pre-approved for a $750,000 SBA loan. She was 29 years old. She had done all of this from a kitchen table in Bevo Mill. Victoria Weston was 33, the daughter of a Dallas real estate developer, polished and precise and deeply attuned to the way things look from the outside. She met Marcus at a charity gala in New York. They were together within 6 months. Within a year, she had moved into his Manhattan apartment. They upgraded to a penthouse, 32 floors up, Central Park view, a kitchen designed by an architect with an 18-month waiting list. And to be fair to Victoria, because this story asks us to be fair even when fairness is uncomfortable, she genuinely cared for Marcus. She was good for him in real ways. But there was a version of Marcus that Victoria had never been asked to show up for. The version without the penthouse. The version sitting alone at 2 in the morning with the rain on the windows and nothing left to offer except himself. Here is what happened to Marcus Hale's empire. It fell. The freight industry hit a brutal post-pandemic correction. A major client representing 40% of Hale Freight Solutions' annual revenue walked. Marcus made a strategic pivot into cold chain logistics, took on $3.2 million in debt to fund it, and then watched his key operations partner pull out 4 months in. Then the supply chain technology platform he had co-founded faced a competitor with a superior product and a 9-figure marketing budget, and its valuation collapsed by 80% in 9 months. One by one, over 22 months, the holdings fell. The freight company, the technology stake, most of the real estate. By October, Marcus Hale had gone from $1 billion in combined value to a checking account balance that would not have covered 6 months of rent on the penthouse he was still living in for 30 more days. This is the part that women watching this will recognize. Not always from their own romantic lives, though many of you will recognize it there too, but from a deeper and more universal experience. The experience of watching someone you gave your full self to reveal, in a moment of real difficulty, that what they were actually committed to was the conditions under which they had met you. Victoria did not leave with drama. There was no scene. She began, in month 2 of the crisis, to spend more time at a friend's place in the Hamptons. By month 4, a ring Marcus had given her was suddenly being cleaned and never came back. In month 6, she sat down with him and told him that she loved him, that she needed him to know that was real, but that she had not signed up for this version of life and needed to protect her future and had to go. She was composed. She was efficient. Her things were out within the week. And then the silence came. 3 weeks of silence from the people he had expected most to hear from. And every woman watching this who has ever given her best to a person or a situation or a relationship and then watched the room empty when the giving stopped being comfortable, every one of you knows exactly what that silence sounds like. It is not loud. That is the thing about it that nobody tells you. It is the quietest sound in the world. and it is deafening. Then, on a Tuesday night in October, at 11:47 in the evening, with rain running down the floor-to-ceiling windows, his phone lit up with a name he almost did not recognize. A name from 5 years ago. A woman he had met once, briefly, in a department store in St. Louis. He sat there for a long moment looking at that name. And then he answered. Diane did not ease into it. She told him who she was, the department store, the $287, the business card. There was a silence on his end long enough that she thought the call might have dropped. Then he said, I remember. She told him she had been following his companies for years. She told him about Carter Okafor and Sandra and the SBA pre-approval. And she told him, and this was the part that stopped him from saying no, that she was not calling because she felt sorry for him. She was calling because she had done her homework and believed that what she was building needed exactly what he still had, and that what he still had, underneath everything that had just happened, was worth considerably more than the market currently thought it was. Then Marcus Hale said, All right, come to New York. She booked a flight for the following Friday. She spent the 48 hours before that flight not rehearsing a pitch, but stress-testing her own assumptions. She went through Carter Okafor's financials line by line with Sandra and identified every weakness before anyone else could find it. She organized 3 copies of the business plan, the financial projections, and the SBA pre-approval letter in a manila folder with tabs, so clearly arranged that any piece of information could be found in 30 seconds. Sandra asked her why she was making this trip alone. Diane said, because this part of it is personal, not romantic. Personal. There is a difference. She flew to New York on a Friday morning and walked into the lobby of a building that still had Marcus Hale's name on the lease. He met her in the lobby. She noticed immediately that his shirt was slightly too big. He had lost weight, and she understood without needing to be told what the previous 22 months had cost him. They sat at his kitchen counter. She put the manila folder between them and did not open it right away. They talked for 3 hours. He asked every hard question a man who has just watched everything collapse asks when someone is offering him something. She answered every single one directly. At one point, he was quiet for a long time looking at the projections. Then he asked, Why me specifically? Diane looked at him and said, Because I have been watching how you do business since I was 24 years old, and I have never once seen you treat a person as a line item. And what I am building cannot afford to be run by someone who does. He said, Give me the weekend. By Sunday evening, he called her. He said, I am in. Let's build it. Marcus relocated to St. Louis within 3 weeks and moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in the Tower Grove neighborhood. Nothing like the penthouse, nothing intended to be. He became Carter Okafor's head of carrier relations and operational strategy. The SBA loan came through 6 weeks after he joined. Of 47 mid-size Midwest companies they contacted for became clients. It was an extraordinary conversion rate, and it was extraordinary because of what Marcus brought. Not just knowledge, but the relationships he had built over 17 years that had survived the collapse of his entire empire because they had never been relationships with his companies. They had been relationships with him. The carriers remembered Marcus Hale. The dispatchers remembered him. The dock supervisors remembered the man who had always known their names and never made them feel invisible. By month 6, Carter Okafor had crossed $180,000 in monthly revenue. By month 9, they signed a lease on a proper 2-floor suite on Olive Street in St. Louis. On the day they moved in, Sandra brought a bottle of good bourbon and 3 glasses. The 3 of them stood in the empty new space, drank 1 glass each, and went back to work. Marcus said later it was the first moment in more than a year that he had felt like himself. Not the billionaire version, the earlier version, the one that had believed completely that what he was building was worth building. It was around that time that Victoria Weston called. Her relationship with the tech investor had ended, publicly, messily. She was warm on the phone. Careful. She said she had been frightened, that she had panicked, that she had made a mistake. Marcus listened and then told her about the phone call. About Diane Carter. About the department store and the $287 and the business card she had kept for 5 years. Victoria listened. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, So it worked out? He said, It is working out. There is a difference. He paid the dinner bill. They said goodbye in the way that people say goodbye when both of them understand that the conversation that just happened was the last one of its kind. Marcus told me later that what he felt on that cab ride was not grief or relief. It was clarity. The clean, simple clarity of understanding, at last, the difference between the people who are present for the performance of a life and the people who are present for the life itself. There was still something Marcus did not know, something Diane had never told him. It came out about a year into the partnership, over a late dinner in the Central West End neighborhood of St. Louis. Sandra left just before 9. Marcus and Diane stayed for another hour, talking about Amara, who was 9 now and had decided with total certainty that she intended to study marine biology, specifically sharks. When Marcus asked how Amara was doing in school and Diane said thriving, the word her teacher had used at the last parent conference, and the way Diane said it, with that compressed and private gratitude that mothers carry when a child they were terrified for turns out to be okay, made Marcus look at her more carefully. He asked if everything was all right. She said yes. Then she said, "Can I tell you something I have never told you?" She told him the real story of that Tuesday afternoon. Not the version that established their professional connection. The real version. She told him about the break room. She told him about the 7 minutes. She told him that for 7 minutes she had sat with the thought of simply stopping, of putting down the weight, of giving herself permission, just once, to not be the woman who keeps going. Then Tanya appeared at the door. Then Diane stood up and went back to the floor. And then Marcus walked in. She told him that the $287 was real and necessary and had kept the lights on, and she was grateful for it. But what he had given her that was larger than the money was the timing. The fact that an ordinary man, a billionaire, yes, but in that moment just an ordinary man making an ordinary choice, had walked into a department store and done something right when there was no audience and nothing in it for him, and that she had witnessed it on that specific day, in that specific 7 minutes after moment, was something she had never been able to dismiss. It was evidence. Evidence that the world she was trying to build toward was not a story she had invented to make the $14 bearable. It was real, and everything she had built had been built on the foundation of that evidence. He said, "Why did you not tell me this before?" She said, "Because I needed us to be far enough into this that it would not sound like I was asking you to be responsible for it." He said, "But I'm not responsible for what you built." She said, "I know, but the reason I kept building is..." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Then Marcus said quietly, "My grandmother used to iron her church clothes on a Wednesday for no reason except that it kept her spirit standing straight." Women who are watching this already understand exactly what Ruth was doing on those Wednesday nights. They have done their own version of it 100 times. Diane understood too. She reached across the table and put her hand briefly over his, the way women do when words would be one thing too many. And then they paid the bill and walked out into the St. Louis night and went back to work the next morning and kept building. That was 3 years ago. Today, Carter Okafor Logistics Consulting operates out of a 2-floor office on Olive Street in St. Louis with 22 full-time employees and $6.8 million in annual revenue. They have expanded into the Southeast and are executing a new push into Texas markets. Sandra Okafor serves as CEO. Diane Carter is president and head of business development. Marcus holds the title of Chief Strategy Officer and manages all carrier relationships, which remain by every measure the firm's strongest competitive advantage. Marcus lives in a comfortable apartment in the Lafayette Square neighborhood of St. Louis. It is not a penthouse. His grandmother Ruth's photograph is on the bookshelf. He cooks on Sunday mornings. The mortgage is being paid on time. Amara is 12 and committed to marine biology, specifically sharks, and has informed both her mother and Marcus that she expects them at her first college research presentation. They have agreed. Marcus and Diane are not romantically involved. There is something that is actually rarer and in many ways more valuable. Partners built entirely on the evidence of who the other person is when it costs them something. Victoria Weston has remarried. Marcus wishes her well and means it. He also said something about her that reveals everything. He said, "Victoria taught me that a person can be genuinely good and still not be available for the parts of life that matter most. Those are two different things. And knowing the difference is not nothing. The framed, uncashed check for $287 hangs on the wall of Diane's office above her desk, beside a photograph of Amara at age 4, asleep on a couch with a library book on her chest. Diane says it is there because she wants to remember what things cost before they were possible. She wants to remember what $14 felt like, what the break room felt like, what 7 minutes on the edge of stopping felt like. She wants to remember all of it specifically so that she can be the person who pays it forward. By her own rough count, she has done something equivalent to what Marcus did for her on 17 separate occasions in the years since. She does not keep track formally. Keeping track, she says, would change what it is. Now I want to sit with you for a moment before we close, because this story is about something that every woman watching already knows and has possibly spent years trying to explain to people who did not want to hear it. It is about the fact that the most powerful thing a person can do is show up completely. Not when it is easy, not when there is something in it for them, not when the other person has something to offer, but when there is nothing. When the accounts are empty and the apartment is half empty, and the only thing on the table is the actual company of a person going through something painful. Victoria was not a villain. She was a person who had decided, somewhere along the way, that her presence was conditional. And conditionally present people are not bad people. They're just not the people you call at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in the rain. Diane Carter was broke and exhausted and 7 minutes from giving up when Marcus Hale walked into that store. And then she spent 5 years becoming the person who showed up for him when nobody else did. Not because he deserved it more than anyone else, but because she had been shown what showing up looks like, and she had made it her life's work to be that person for someone else. That is the whole lesson. That is everything. Women in this audience have been Diane Carter. Many of you have been the woman with $14 and a sick child and a break room and a decision to make. Many of you have been the woman who built something real and quietly and without anyone fully understanding what it cost. Many of you have been the woman who showed up for someone who did not fully see you and kept showing up anyway and wondered whether it was making a difference. It was making a difference. It always makes a difference. You just do not always get to see it land. Here is what I want you to do with this story. I want you to think of the Tanya in your life, the person who appeared at the break room door and said the matter-of-fact true thing that kept you moving. And I want you to think about whether you have been that Tanya for someone else recently. Because the world is full of women sitting in break rooms doing math that does not get better and needing someone to walk through the door and remind them that Gary is a small man with a clipboard and they're not going to let him make them small. Be that person this week. Be that person deliberately and without expectation of return. And then come back and tell me in the comments what happened. Drop your city too. While you are there, we want to know where this story is landing tonight. Because I can already feel that it is landing somewhere real. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of yourself or someone you love or the woman you are still becoming, share it. Not for the algorithm, for the woman in your life who needs to hear it. And if you want to be here for the next story, because I promise you the next story will reach you somewhere just as deep, hit subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. We tell the stories that do not make the front page. The ones that live in the lives of ordinary women doing extraordinary things with whatever they have been given. And there is nothing ordinary about what Diane Carter did with $14, a business card, and 7 minutes in a break room. Nothing ordinary about it at all. Thank you for being here tonight. Now, go be someone's $287.